Hi there, this is Melanie Hunter with Holistic Health. Thank you so much for tuning in today. So a few weeks ago, I posted a video on going gluten-free for beginners. And I was laying in bed last night realizing that one thing that I've heard commonly is that people don't think that they have a problem with gluten. And so I felt like I needed to address this. So I'm sorry to beat a dead horse when it comes to gluten, but I really feel like a gluten-free diet is the foundation of a special diet. So if you have a variety of health concerns, which I'm going to rattle off in a minute, then it's really worth looking into and exploring gluten. And so I think the other video that I posted did a decent job of how do you go about that, right? But what I think that I missed is who should go about that. So do you have a problem with gluten, and how do you know? And so let's talk about gluten a little bit. I'm not going to go too detailed into the science, but essentially, what I learned in nutrition school is that gluten is inflammatory, period. I have done extensive reading and research, and I can say almost without fail that every functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor that I follow would also say that gluten is inflammatory. Another piece of it is that gluten in select people, or possibly the majority of the population that is under question, people create a molecule called zonulin when they eat gluten. And what zonulin does is it creates leaky gut and intestinal permeability. Leaky gut is bad for a variety of reasons. I think that that's kind of a well-known term at this point, but essentially you don't want all of the proteins from the foods that you have leaking into your bloodstream, because then it's going to cause more food reactions and more inflammation. So essentially, you're talking about leaky gut and inflammation. So we're going to focus on inflammation because I think that that is one that everyone agrees on, that gluten causes inflammation. So why is inflammation a problem? In acute situations, like when you cut yourself, inflammation is not a problem. Inflammation is necessary. It's part of the healing process. However, when you get chronic inflammation is associated with just about every chronic disease that you can name and think about. So things that are specific that have been studied for looking at a gluten association or gluten intolerance with a chronic disease, there's an abundance, but autoimmune diseases, autism, ADHD, infertility has been tied to gluten sensitivity, depression, anxiety, or mental health disorders, including dementia and Alzheimer's. Those are associated with inflammation as well. Cardiovascular disease is associated with inflammation. Arthritis, that's a big one. That's an inflammatory disease. Your joints are inflamed. So if you're dealing with any of these, and I'm sure I'm missing some, then you don't want to add more inflammation to the fire. And so what does that look like for you? So if you think like, do I have an issue? And maybe you have an undiagnosed, or maybe you don't have any of these. Maybe you don't have diabetes or cardiovascular disease or ADHD or arthritis or an autoimmune disease. So you could think, I don't have a problem with gluten. Maybe. However, if you suffer from symptoms such as the obvious ones, which would be GI issues, which can come in the form of diarrhea, constipation, excess bloating or gas, IBS, that obviously can be linked to gluten intolerance. And then there's a lot of sneaky symptoms. I talked about this in my last video, but Maddox has showed up as in the form of chronic ear infections. Maybe you have chronic sinus infections. Again, there's inflammation. And then if your body's creating more inflammation because of gluten, that's going to make your sinuses more inflamed, and that's adding fuel to the fire. So that could be an underlying issue of why you have chronic sinus infections. Joint pain. I think joint pain is kind of a common one, right? And we think that arthritis is somewhat normal. It's a normal part of aging. And that's not really true. It's just very common in America with our standard American diet that you get arthritis with age. However, it's an inflammatory condition. Some would call it an autoimmune condition. And so it's not really normal, right? And it's definitely not optimal. So if you can decrease your joint pain by eliminating gluten, I think that that's well worth it. So migraines are also associated. So if you have, again, symptoms you're looking for, Migraines could be caused by that. Depression and anxiety can also be caused by gluten intolerance. I think I touched on that, but anal itching is often a sign of food intolerance. It can be other things too, but that's one. Mood swings, I definitely talked about that in the last video. But so there's a variety of symptoms. So you really want to assess yourself and your life, and do you have these symptoms? And if you do, then I think it's really worthwhile to do an elimination diet. And there's lots of different ways to do elimination diets, and I can go into those in greater detail, but for the simplicity of this video, it's really about taking gluten out of your diet completely. I said this in the last video, but really I can't stress it enough. Completely out of your diet for 3 weeks. I think that this is really the magic number. It takes about 2 weeks for your body to eliminate all the gluten in your system, so you really need to give it a go for 3 weeks. And I'm talking not like, oh, I did it for 3 weeks with a couple cheat days. I'm talking about like 0 gluten for 3 solid weeks. So you have to read labels, you have to ask at restaurants, you cannot assume that things are not gluten-free. You know, you would look at something and say, there's no way that has gluten in it, and sometimes it does. It's crazy, it's sneaky, it's just used excessively in our food, unfortunately. So you eliminate it from your diet completely, you give it a go for 3 weeks, and then you have a field day. And if you want to eat whatever you would normally eat with gluten in it, go for it. And then you can really see what the effects of gluten are on you. And it doesn't mean it has to be an immediate reaction, right? We're not talking about an allergy like anaphylactic shock. We're talking about an intolerance. So sometimes those symptoms come, you know, anywhere from immediately following to 48 hours after you consume a food, possibly even longer, but that's really the window that you want to look at. So if you do this test and this elimination diet added by a provocative food test, adding gluten back in, then you really need to just pay attention. How do you feel compared to when you weren't eating gluten? Write down all of your symptoms if you have any. If you really have none and nothing's changed, awesome, congratulations, and you can stop watching all of these gluten-filled videos. However, I think a lot of people are going to find that they feel better when they're not eating gluten. Maybe they have less joint pain, less migraines, less all sorts of things, behavioral issues in children, and inflammatory conditions. And, you know, we want to eat an anti-inflammatory diet, which I will do a video on in the future, but this is the foundation, I think, or at least a really big piece of the puzzle for an anti-inflammatory diet. So I hope that helps. And like I said, I'm sorry I'm stuck on the gluten train, but I just thought that that was kind of important to clarify. Look forward to seeing you all again here soon. Thank you so much for your time, and wishing you all much love and light. Thank you.